Thank you.
All right. Good morning, Miss Ellis.
Good morning.
If you could please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to provide is true and accurate?
Yes, I do.
All right. Thank you. And for the record, could you please state and spell your name and address and what county this parcel is in?
Elizabeth Ellis, Elizabeth. Ellis is Ellis. Address is 3063 265th Street, Dallas, Iowa. And this parcel is in Wright County.
My favorite place to get gas off of I-35, by the way. So
that's good.
Dallas truck stop. All right. We're going to have staff go ahead and pull up, which they already have, the KMZ file of your parcel. We assign a name to it with letters and numbers and all that. What do you refer to it as, or how would you like to refer to it?
We call it the Hill Farm.
Hill Farm. Perfect. So as we go forward here in the description of the property, we'll just refer to it as the Hill Farm.
Okay.
And then just since it's kind of a really long piece, maybe we'll refer to things as the north and the south side of the Hill Farm. All right. What is the current use of your property, and do you have any different uses in the plan in the future?
Currently, we have a corn and beans rotation on the farm. It's been that for as long as my husband's owned it, and we will continue doing row crop rotation.
And how long have you owned it?
My husband bought it in the late 80s. He was about 28-ish years old, and it was the first farm that he's ever bought.
And can you please provide a general description of the property?
It would be the east 56 acres of the northeast. Let me see here. Vernon Section 4, the east 56 acres of the northeast quarter.
And is that entire parcel yours beyond to the west as well?
No, it is not.
Okay. Anything to the east of that parcel yours?
Just the 40 acres right next to the north, right south of that gravel road. Yes, that is correct where you're pointing.
Okay. I'm going to ask you some things about that parcel. So when I'm describing those features, if you can just please describe where they're at on that parcel.
Mm-hmm.
So basically we're taking your words and putting them into the record. So are there any buildings or other structures on this parcel?
No, sir.
How about drainage tile on the parcel?
Yes, there is. The drainage tile is located on the south half of this parcel. I do have a drainage map that I did not upload, sorry. I don't know if you could scan it in, but it consists of 5-inch tile, pattern tiled, and it would be probably from the, I have it. So from the waterway, the green area, the waterway, correct? It's from there in south is where our tile is. And they are 5-inch tile. And my map, it does not tell me how far apart they are, but they are going east and west. And then on the east side, there is a north and south tile that they connect into, and it goes to the southeast corner of that field.
I believe, Ms. Ellis, you do have a pointer there too if you want to use that.
I got the pointer. So it would be from this area, the tile goes this way, and then down, down to here is where it ends.
And you did say it's a pattern tile?
It is, yes.
And is it every 40 feet? Or not sure?
It doesn't say on here. On one point it said 85 feet, which was some tile, oops, sorry, from up here, and there's some going across this way. 3 lines, and that's, I believe it says 85 feet apart. It's kind of some chicken scratches from way back when.
Gotcha.
And I could submit it to you for the file if you'd like.
Would you like our staff to make copies of that for the different parties?
That would be fine. I'm good with that. It doesn't.
Thank you.
Sorry, I should have done that.
No, you're
I got
fine.
late last night.
You're fine. We're more than happy to help out there. How about anything like natural gas lines, telecommunications, other underground facilities? Is there any third-party
Other than that, the
easements?
tile, there's no other easements and or facilities on that property.
How about any above-ground facilities? Overhead electric lines, anything of that nature?
No, sir.
Okay. Any streams, body of water, ponds?
No, sir.
Timber forest?
Nope.
And you said no other easements. Any other features or conditions that might not be readily apparent and that may affect or be affected by the proposed project?
No, sir.
Okay. And did you receive an easement proposal from the company?
Yes, I did.
And then did you and your husband, or either or both, did you have what I would think of as like a sit-down conversation, and did you make any sort of counter proposal back to the company?
We did not have the sit down. I had conversation with him out in the parking lot, in my driveway, I should say, not parking lot. It is paved, but is. And in that conversation, I had asked a few questions, and I have it listed in my testimony that I'd like to read later on. However, some of the questions I asked is like annual payments instead of a one lump sum. We own wind turbines, and we get an annual payment from them. That was a no. I requested the ability to hook into the pipeline at some date in my easement, and he said no, but why? And I stated that with carbon dioxide, our plants, corn crops and bean crops utilizes CO2 for photosynthesis. There's a time that it could happen that if carbon's not in the air and we have to start supplying nutrients to our crops, I might want to put a plant there, create our own carbon, and sell it as fertilizer to other entities. We now have low sulfur diesel. Sulfur used to be in the air. Plants utilize that to green up, and we now have to supplement our crops, especially corn, with sulfur because they have now low sulfur diesel. There's a lot of what ifs in the future.
So could you please describe any specific concerns you have and any recommendations you have for the board to address those concerns?
Some of the reasons that we didn't sign the easement is what will be the next thing that they will put in the ground? Are they going to put another pipe beside it? Who will be the next owner of the pipeline? History has proven that the owner of Subic Carbon Solutions does not stay long-term on a project. That's pretty concerning to us. On the easement, the legal description on the documents listed the entire parcel. They didn't specify where on our parcel that this pipeline was going to go. They showed us a map. Since then, they have, with our notice of eminent domain, they do have an actual surveyed legal description, meets and bounds types. The company and the project does not serve a public purpose. I would like to have somebody tell me today what the public purpose is for this pipeline. There was no cost sharing or annual payments. I believe I said that before, for the life of the projects to be made to landowners. Land agents changed frequently. I have in my file every time they left a little door hanger on our door. I work in town, and my husband's farms. We have another farm down the road that is where all of our machinery. So he's in and out. So every time a land agent dropped a door hanger off, they'd write their name on it. I'd hate to know how many we went through. Valuation of our crop ground will be decreased. I talked to our assessor, county assessor, and because of the pipeline, the valuation of our crop ground will decrease. We assume all the risk for a one-time payment and their use of our land forever. It's kind of bothering to us. At the time of talking with the land agents, there was no permit issued or granted to build a pipeline, so why should we give an easement to something that's not even been permitted? Because we're signing it away for forever. All terms in the easement were written by them to protect them and give them an open to place it anywhere they want the easement to be on our farm with no respect to the landowners. Animal feeding operations, our master matrix for the state of Iowa, has setbacks. I feel that a hazardous pipeline should have setbacks away from livestock facilities, a setback definitely from residents. There's my son, not at this farm, but on another place where it crosses. My son's house will be probably 2,000 feet away from it. However, the neighbor to his south will be in his backyard. There's a lot of what ifs, but I have drove by and witnessed where a natural pipeline had over by Hudson, Iowa, where I grew up, and they were out tiling that field and hit the tile, and it blew up. It took a couple of hours to get the pipeline shut off for this natural gas line, and 5 of the guys on the tiling crew died. So,
Do you know the size of the pipe they're proposing on your property?
16-inch. It's no greater than 16-inch, so it could be less.
In the pipe you spoke of in Hudson, do you know what product was going through that?
I believe it was natural gas. I cannot swear by that, though. And I was younger, way younger than today.
I was going to say, I don't remember the IUB having that one in front of us any time lately, but...
Yeah, no, it was years ago.
Okay, thank you. And then, did you recommend any alternative routes for the proposed line? And if so, could you please describe that route and its advantages or disadvantages?
I would not suggest this on any other landowner in my neighborhood. These are my neighbors. They're my friends. No.
All right. Those are all the questions I have at this time. So we will go to the other parties.
I do have written testimony that I'd like to say maybe before the question. Is that okay? Or
yeah, that's
or do
fine.
you want me to do it later?
It's your choice.
I'll do it now.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you for listening to us today. This is a very emotional topic when you are talking about private property rights. We as landowners take great pride in the care of our property, taking into consideration the use of conservation practices to preserve our land. We want the best for my husband and I want the best for our land for our son to take over someday. This property was the first parcel of land that my husband purchased in the 80s. He was young, 28-ish, and wanted to farm. At this time, he was farming with his father but had a dream to own his own land. He didn't know if he was going to be able to make the payments. Interest was high, economy was poor, but he had the desire and the work ethic to make it. My parents immigrated over to the United States in 1955 with $300 in their pockets. They too worked hard and purchased land as it was my father's dream to be a farmer. My parents always told me, invest your money into land, it will always be there and it will be yours. It's not unpredictable like the stock market. Is this really true today? What is our government allowing to happen? The final decision that you make will impact future legislation and laws for any private company to utilize eminent domain and the taking of our land for private gain. Fast forward to today, I'm wondering why we work so hard for our land. There are several areas in the Iowa Code that talks about preserving private property rights, protect natural and historic resources and fragile ecosystems of the state, including forests, wetlands, rivers, streams, lakes, aquifers, prairies, and recreational areas to promote the efficient use and conservation of energy resources, to promote the creation and maintenance of wildlife habitat, to consider the protection of soil from wind and water erosion, and preserve the availability of and use of agricultural land for agricultural production. In Iowa Code 331.301, which is the county home rule, talks about protecting and preserving the rights, privileges, and property of the county or of its residents, and to preserve and improve the peace, safety, health, welfare, comfort, and convenience of its residents. And yet, we have been served with a notice of eminent domain proceedings. My husband and I currently have a farm in Franklin County with wind turbines on them. My in-laws owned the land and negotiated the terms. To this day, we are still fighting the compaction, the broken tiles, and when we wanted to finish pattern tiling the farm, we had the tiler there, and the turbine company still did not come to do the electrical line locations. We had to wait over a week for them to come. My mother's land is by Waterloo, Iowa, and she has a Sprint cell tower, a natural gas line, and high-line wires that cross her farms. We are well aware of what this type of construction can do to our land. With all this being said, as a landowner, I do not want the pipeline to cross my field, cut my tile, compact my soil, disrupt and turn my soil, all in the name of a 45Q federal tax credit. One has to believe that there is a carbon dioxide problem, which there is not, to believe that there is a public purpose. In talking to the county assessor, the valuation of our ground will decrease due to the hazardous pipeline going through it. We do not intend to sell our land, but I know that there are many other landowners that don't have children or grandchildren that wish to farm the ground and may consider someday to sell. The small amount of compensation that they are offering today does not compensate enough for the what-ifs in the future. Let's talk about the compensation and easement language. Summit land agents are offering 3-year crop damage. Yes, they said that if you can prove later you're still having a decrease in crop yields, they would pay out. That was never in writing. The land agents changed frequently. In the Exhibit C addendum of special conditions, I requested to get annual payments instead of one lump sum. Our wind turbines pay annually. He told me they cannot do that. I requested to put in the addendum the ability to connect to the pipeline. He said no, but then asked why. I stated that our crops utilize carbon dioxide to grow. If carbon is taken out of the air, then we will have to add it back to the plants as a supplement for the best productivity. CO2 is needed for photosynthesis. Sulfur is a vital nutrient, especially in corn, to make them green. We are now adding sulfur to our fertilizer program. I wanted to renegotiate terms if the ownership of the pipeline changes or the easement was sold. Again, that was a no. Because we all know the history of the owner of Summit, that will not stay under the same ownership. Who's next? China? There are now newer and better ways to get rid of carbon, such as a new catalyst that turns carbon dioxide into ethanol with over 90% efficiency, which was stated by a researcher at Northern Illinois University. Other uses using catalysts and using chemical reactions to build products such as methanol, urea, to use as a fertilizer, of polymers for the use as durable products in buildings, and using CO2 to make diamonds. These are called lab-grown diamonds, or LGDs. There's an article from Bill Howell, CEO of Adkins Energy, LLC, that was released in June of 2023, about how Adkins Energy and CAP CO2 Solutions are building the first facility to convert ethanol plant waste CO2 to green methanol. In short, Adkins Energy is leading the way for the ethanol industry, demonstrating how best to leverage their CO2 for the next generation of ethanol industries. By generating local revenues without disruption of agricultural land or eminent domain, green methanol is an exciting alternative to the widely discussed CO2 pipelines. Each of you can research the many other uses of capturing CO2 that researchers are coming up with. I feel that is why Summit Carbon Solutions Company is pushing so hard to move this forward. But with rushing this through does not make it the best way. Other ways of capturing CO2 would not disrupt our agricultural lands, leaving it for us farmers to clean up, fertilize, repair tile, pick up rocks, the many, many rocks, and try to build the disrupted soil back to its productive state. Eminent domain should not be used for CO2 pipelines. They are not for public ownership like a park or a highway. They are not for private ownership that serve the public use like a railroad or energy or communication facilities that are regulated as common carriers. And they are not for private ownership that serves a public purpose. Iowa Code 6A.21 is the condemnation of agricultural land, and it's under the definitions. 6A.211D states public use or public purpose or public improvement does not include the authority to condemn agricultural land for private development purposes unless the owner of the agricultural land consents to the condemnation. Under Iowa Code 6A.22, 2A states public use or public purpose or public improvement means one or more of the following. And I'm sure you've all read the code and understand there's the 5 different meanings or definitions for the public use, public purpose, public improvements, none of which this pipeline qualifies for. Under 6A.222B, except as specifically included in the definition in paragraph A, which is the 5 definitions that it's very long and I'm not going to read them all. Public use, public purpose, or public improvement does not mean economic development activities resulting in increased tax revenues, increased employment opportunities, privately owned or privately funded housing and residential development, privately owned or privately funded commercial or industrial development, or the lease of publicly owned property to private party. As Summit representatives came to the Board of Supervisors meetings, they boasted the amount of tax dollars that they would pay to the county and the many uses these dollars could be used for. They talked about economic development and the number of people that they would employ during the construction and the other wonderful things for the county. But not once did they boast about the public purpose and how removing the CO2 from ethanol plants was going to save the world. Is the end product of ethanol from the ethanol plants any different after the pipeline is built than what it is today? It will be the exact same product. Has anyone thought to start with 2 ethanol plants that are close to North Dakota and make sure that this is even going to work and then expand from there? Would we be here today if the government did not offer the 45Q tax credit? It's a money grab, and we as farmers are fighting for our land. It is not for the money, it is for the land and our rights as property owners. The final decision that you make will impact all future legislation and laws and set a precedent for any private company to utilize eminent domain in the taking of our land for private gain. Thank you.
Mr. Taylor?
Thank you. Ms. Ellis, I'm Wally Taylor. I represent the Sierra Club. And first of all, on your property there, the red shaded area, and you talked about that green, there's like a waterway perhaps toward the south end.
That is correct.
Is that what that is?
That is correct.
Okay. Do you have any concerns about how the pipeline might affect that? I see the pipeline goes south of there, but is there any underground connectivity between the area where the pipeline is and that waterway that you know of?
Both north and south of that waterway is tile, pattern tile.
Okay. Are you concerned about what would happen to that tile if the pipeline is put in?
The tile was, I believe my husband stated that the tile was put in after he purchased the farm, and it is a plastic tile, I believe. Anytime you disrupt it, it's hard to get so that it flows correctly. You're going to have soil that is compacted and or is moved, and the best is not to disturb the tile once it's laid.
And the tile on the southeast corner of the property, you say, runs north and south, so it would be perpendicular to the pipeline.
Correct.
Yeah. What did Summit tell you, if anything, about the impact on your tile?
They had a contractor that would come in, and as they are laying their pipe, their tiling crews would come in and fix all of our tile and repair it.
Was that in writing?
No, sir.
Let's go to the northern part of your parcel. And there's a sort of a wavy dark line in the middle there. What is that?
That is also another waterway.
Do you have concerns about how the pipeline would impact your soil and your crop yield?
Yes, in the easement, they wanted to give us 3 years for crop damage, but that is not near enough. The compaction that they will have on our farm and the disruption of the soil, you're moving all the nutrients, you're changing the soil composure and how it's put together. And so when that ditch is put back, and I don't know how wide they're, if it's a 16-inch, I don't know how wide they have to dig to make it. But, and then of course there's the rocks as they dig stuff up. I know that they said that they will pick up the rocks afterwards. However, working with other contractors with the county, we still pick up a lot of rocks after the contractor leaves.
Do you know how deep your topsoil is there?
I do not know.
But you think there are rocks underneath the topsoil?
Yeah, for some reason, rocks grow really well.
And is that a particular concern that you have about how the pipeline would be constructed, or the ditch constructed for the pipeline? If the rock is disturbed?
The concern is that as they put everything back over the soil back over the pipeline, and they're going to try to put the topsoil back on the top again, you've already disturbed, and there's going to be rocks. We're going to have to put extra fertilizer on it. It's not going to be the same, and 3 years is not going to be enough years to get it to be productive again to the state that it is today.
Are there any buildings or structures south of your property? If we can pull the KMZ up a little bit so we can look at the south. Yeah. So is it fair to say that the closest building would be what looks like might be a Cape Road down to the very...
That is correct. There's a CAFO, and then there's also a little house where some...
oh, I see. Yes.
Where some people live there.
Okay. About how far is that from where the pipeline would be?
I'm going to say it's a half mile.
Okay.
But I'm just as concerned about on the north side of there, across the road, is a house. And then also to the east of that is pasture. And that farmer, he has horses and cattle, cow-calf herd, and he uses that field north and east of our property for his livestock. So after he harvests his corn, then he runs the cattle out on that field.
Okay. About how far would that be from the pipeline, if you know?
That would probably be just less than a half mile.
Okay.
I believe. I got my mile sections correct.
Perhaps the IUB staff could help us out there?
We can ask and see. And where do you want to go from? The pipeline to what is that, Mr. Taylor?
The house up in the top of the KMZ.
You want to go to...
That's not a house. Go north of the road.
So, okay.
North
So
of the road.
That's
a house.
Is that other just an empty acreage?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So just a little over half a mile, it looks like.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. You were right. Do you have any concerns about what would happen if the pipeline were rupture or leak?
Definitely. Our neighbors are very important to us. When you live in town, your neighbors is a person that lives right across the street from you. Our neighbors are maybe a couple miles away. We do not live close to this farm. We are probably a mile and a half, maybe 2 miles from the pipeline. However, my son just bought an acreage, and he will be probably maybe 2,000 feet from it, and the neighbor to the north of him, it's going to probably be less than 600 feet that it'll be going past. Very concerned. There's been no plume studies. There have been no FEMSA, I think is it FEMSA? Alphabet soup. They haven't given, I don't feel that they've studied enough or made enough rules. If you look at CAFOs and you look at planning and zoning, these all have setbacks that needs to be, like the master matrix on the CAFOs. What is it? Is it 1,850 feet from a residence? I'm pulling it off the top of my head. And yet there's no setbacks for a pipeline, or is there? Can you tell me, is there setbacks for pipelines for this?
So I can't answer any questions because I'm kind of the judge of the case, but that would be something that the company, when we get to that part of the hearing, that those will be questions that will be presented to them.
It would have been nice if they could have gone first.
We agree, but
I'm sorry.
um,
Sorry.
I don't know if a board member Burns asked you this. If he did, I apologize. Um, in your discussions with the Summit land agents, did you propose an alternative route?
No, I did not. I don't want to put that on any of my neighbors.
So you don't think there'd be any appropriate place to put this pipeline?
It would be appropriate if they would serve a public purpose, but I don't see what their purpose is for.
Regarding your conversations with the land agents, how would you characterize in some detail the tactics they use to get you to sign an easement?
Their tactic, the multiple agents that we had, were actually very polite. I was pretty straightforward on some of the what things that I wanted at that time, and pretty much when they kept telling me no, I just said, well, we're done talking then. And so they sent 3 different offers to me. One was November 5th of 2021. The second one was April 27th of 2022. The third was October 24th of 2022. And then I got the notice from the IUB, I believe was what it was, kind of vague as to who sent it. Frederickson, maybe, and Byron. They sent in July the notice of eminent domain. So those are the correspondences that I had. But the different changes are things that in the easement did not change, or the Exhibit C.
Yeah. Did you feel like eminent domain was sort of a threat?
We knew it was coming. I don't know if I would call it a threat. It was mentioned, if the next step would be eminent domain if you don't try to make an agreement, is pretty much the way it was.
Is that what the land agents told you?
No, they didn't. Our land agent did not say that, but you could imply it. But no, they were reasonable. They were good to talk. They're human beings. They're just doing a job.
If there were a pipeline break or rupture, where is the closest emergency personnel? Where would they come from?
Dow's is the closest, and that is approximately 5 miles away. It's a small town of about 640 people, and they have limited resources.
Good. That's a volunteer operation, I assume.
Yes, it is.
Do you know if they've been trained in dealing with the CO2 rupture?
No, they have not.
Do you believe that your crop yield will be impacted by the pipeline?
Yes, it will.
Why do you think that?
It'll take years to get the soil compaction back up through the frost, freeze and thaw processes. We'll have to put additional fertilizer. What they were trying to compensate us was not enough for what it's going to cost to get that crop back to its productive state.
Yeah. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Ms. Gruenhagen?
Thank you, Hi. My name is Chris Grunhagen, and I'm representing the Iowa Farm Bureau Federation, and I have a few questions for you here today. But before I get into that, you handed out a tile map earlier. Would you like that to be a hearing exhibit and to be entered into the record?
Yes, please.
You need to ask him.
May I please have this entered into the record?
You may, and Ms. Grunhagen is, must be reading my notes of my to-do list, so,
Thank you.
yes,
I
you may.
appreciate it.
And are there any objections from any parties on entering this? All right, seeing none, we are calling this Ellis Hearing Exhibit number 1 is entered into the record, and thank you, Ms. Grunhagen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Ellis, you were just talking to Mr. Taylor about crop yields, and you were concerned, you had expressed some concern that you'll have reduced crop yields for longer than the 3 years. Do you remember that conversation?
Yes.
Okay. Would you want Summit then to be responsible for paying for any reduced crop yields in the easement area past that 3-year period?
Yes, I would. And I believe I read that, and I do have some points that I would like to have added to my easement if I was to have to negotiate at some point, of which I really don't want to.
What would those points be?
I would want to make sure that the pipe diameter is no greater than 16 inches, that all drain tile and terrace repair for so long as the company exercises its right under the easement agreement. If the landowner notifies the company that any drainage tile, terrace, or irrigation system on the grantor's property has been damaged as a direct result of the company's activities, that they will come in and repair. If at some point there's abandonment of the CO2 pipeline for a period of 5 years, consecutive years, that the landowner and company shall comply with the abandonment requirements under 49 CFR Part 195 and Iowa Code Chapter 479B. I do not want any above ground facilities on our property. I want the restoration requirements as under Iowa Code 479B. I would like to have construction notification that the company agrees to use its best effort to provide the landowner at least 1 week's notice of the date upon the company anticipating commencement of the project. I would like the company to stop construction in wet conditions. If the pipeline no longer transports carbon dioxide, I would like to renegotiate the easement. I want all debris removal done. So if they use any planks, any boards, any broken tile, I want all of debris attributable to the pipeline construction and related activities to be removed. I'd like to have a tile map after the completion of the construction. The company will provide the landowner with drawings and showings of GPS locations of the tile lines encountered in the construction of the pipeline facility. Failure to construct in the event the company has not commenced construction of the pipeline and other pipeline facilities within 5 years after the effective date. This easement is null and void. Restricted ingress and egress. That was probably one thing we should have talked about earlier. The only way that they can get to the hazardous pipeline is by crossing someone else. There is no other way to get to it. So they will have to cross my neighbor's field to get and check any pipeline to get to ours. So restricted ingress and egress, except in cases of an emergency, ingress and egress on landowners' property shall be limited to the pipeline easement, temporary construction easement, any areas of access easement, or other rights of way specifically shown on Exhibit B, and any public right-of-ways, which we don't have any public right-of-ways. We are landlocked. And when I say landlocked, is the land south of the permanent and temporary easement. We will not be able to, not there, just the red south of it. Yes, that, where you're pointing at. Thank you. We will not, unless we have I believe they call them trench plugs, we will not be able to farm that land. So it's not just the permanent easement, temporary easement, it's also south of there. We will not be able to farm that unless they give us a bridge, let's say, for ease of calling it something, a bridge to go over it. And here also in the easement, the future crop loss. If after 3 years from the initial construction, landowner experiences crop deficiencies, companies shall be liable and will pay for continued actual crop deficiencies caused by the construction, maintenance, or operation of company's pipeline, provided that the landowner notifies the company in writing during the growing season at least 30 days prior to harvest so that the company may observe and measure the claimed deficiencies in standing crops. Such deficiencies shall be determined by comparing yields with the impacted area of the crop yields immediately adjacent to the pipeline easement that were not impacted by the company's construction activities, or alternatively, landowner provides supporting documentation of crop deficiencies from the combine yield mapping. I want to make sure that they use a double ditch, which means that the company agrees to save and double ditch topsoil from the affected easement area during installation, and said topsoil will be replaced back to the original area as near as practicable. The company agrees to only segregate the soil in such areas to the extent necessary to install the pipeline. And then I definitely would like to have an indemnity clause in there. An easement agreement is unchanged, and then capitalized terms. So
You've really given a lot of thought to this. I appreciate the detail. Can I follow up on a few of the things you mentioned?
yes, you may.
When you mentioned the drain tile and that you expected them to repair any damage to that, would you expect that even if you didn't discover there was damage until like 5 years down the road?
Yes.
And with the restoration requirements that you talked about, the agricultural land restoration requirements, if Summit had to come in and repair or replace some of the pipeline, would you want them to follow those land restoration requirements at that time also?
Yes, ma'am.
And you mentioned you own some land south of your parcel also that's landlocked?
No, it's where the pipeline is.
Mm-hmm.
There's that strip there that is landlocked. So you won't be able to get to that unless they leave us, a bridge. It depends on when the construction is. It could be, if it started after harvest, it's not going to be a problem. So that all depends on construction time.
So what you've identified is there's a strip of crop ground on this parcel that's going to be south of the pipeline.
Correct.
That's not in the temporary construction easement.
Correct. Okay. Yes, there is.
Thank you. Did you file any comments in the docket?
No, I did not.
I'm asking that question just to make sure that we're not missing any as we go forward. And is this farm enrolled in any federal farm programs?
Just crop insurance.
Are there any compliance requirements in order to maintain crop insurance? like, do you have conservation compliance requirements?
I assume so, but my husband takes care of that.
Okay, no problem.
Hi, Mars.
Other than you have a couple of grassed waterways, are there any other conservation structures on this property?
I do not believe so.
So, if I have a couple of things, I just want to make sure I cover them. You mentioned some concern about rocks,
Mm-hmm.
I believe, in some of your conversation with Mr. Taylor. Have you reviewed the ag land mitigation plan that Summit has filed?
No, I have not.
As a part of that plan, it requires them to remove rocks that are 3 inches in average diameter or larger. Is that something that, is that size rock, would that meet your needs in rock removal?
Yes, it would. And I have heard about the 3-inch size rock. So, but yes, that would, I'm hard pressed to believe that a contractor will meet that requirement. But yes, that's what I would like.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Stuck, I see you have your name 10 up, so I would ask if you have some questions.
Yes, I do. Thank you. I'm Lisa Stuck from Wright County, and I had a couple questions. They touched on the emergency response, so that's a personal thing because our 2 sons are on the volunteer fire department in Dallas. So they would be, and one of them's an EMT, so they would be the first affected. And you're right, they have had no training for the carbon. They have no equipment to take care of all of this. I did want to ask you, is at any time did a Summit representative state that they would not fix your tile if you were taken by eminent domain?
No, they had not. No, eminent domain was not really discussed.
Okay. And in your capacity as working with the Wright County Board of Supervisors, would you talk a little bit about the drainage districts that you're familiar with?
Sure. Our Board of Supervisors acts as trustees to the drainage districts. And in Wright County, we have 235 drainage districts, plus or minus. And then off of those drainage districts, we have laterals and open ditches. Wright County, and actually north central Iowa, northwest Iowa, is probably in the 1850s to 1900s was a swamp. It was a pot. Some people call it potholes. Some people call it glacier slides. And when people were starting to move to Iowa and moving from the south up, they had to start, they understood how good the soil was in Wright County. However, it was so wet, they couldn't farm it. So they started tiling. At a point, you own this land, somebody else owns this land, and you're trying to create an outlet for your tile. They decided to start creating drainage districts. Drainage districts is a watershed, and it's kind of like if you have a plate, and here's your plate, and when it rains, it falls in this plate, and this is one drainage district. It falls on this watershed or this plate. That's another drainage district. These drainage districts or watersheds are created by an engineer, and so the drainage district, a lot of people have it. It's kind of a misnomer. They call it county tiles, but it's not actually a true county tile. It's an asset of the people that are within that watershed. So an engineer comes in and says, this is the drainage district. These are the boundaries of the watershed of this drainage district. And then when they built the tiles, which they then called the district tiles or a main tile or a lateral tile, then those were built. Many of them in Wright County were 1900s to 1930s is when most of the drainage districts were created. So many of the tile that this pipeline will be crossing was put in the ground, could have been in the as I just said, 1900s to the 1930s. A lot of it, some of it's clay, most of it is a cement tile. When you start disturbing this over 100-year-old tile and moving the dirt around it, we've talked to some contractors in our office about when they hit that to maybe tile into, or you have to allow access to the landowners around to tile into the district asset. That tile starts to crumble. And so anytime you disturb it or you try to maneuver it, or it's old, it starts having blowouts with the high water pressure. If you start having heavy rains and stuff, we do see blowouts, and then we send contractors out to fix the tile. It's so the where I'm going with this is that the tile is really old and it's fragile. To repair tile nowadays, if you're going to put a new tile line in for a county tile, it can be anywhere from $500,000 to $700,000, depending on the length and the size of the tile. When we were doing the ag drainage well closure programs, we were up into the $1.5 million. That was cost share with the state. But when I was saying about a misnomer of being a county tile, it's not. Those projects, when tile is repaired or when there's problems with your tile, it is the engineer comes up with a classification, and on that classification is the landowners within that watershed are the ones that are paying. Drainage tax assessments are mailed out to those landowners. The county does hire the contractor, take the work orders and that, but the landowners are the ones that are paying for that. So it kind of gives you an explanation in a very short term of what a watershed is and our drainage. But I'd like to emphasize that the structures out there are very old. The county supervisors have passed a resolution as to how they would like to have Summit Carbon Solutions or the pipeline go through Wright County, that they would like to have them bore underneath the tile to not disturb it. They have set some specifications of the tile and what is expected from the pipeline company. And I guess another part, like for myself, I would like the pipeline to be at least 72 inches deep in the ground, so that when we want to tile, or if we have to do something, I don't have to worry about either our tiler or their tiler hitting the pipeline as they tile our fields.
And even if the summit does go below the old drainage tiles, that's still not 100% that those drainage tiles will not shift and break anyway.
That is true. That is very true.
And so landowners will be affected by this pipeline even if they do not have it running through their land. Is this correct? If the drainage tile would break.
Yes, because what happens here affects any landowner down.
Okay.
And or above, because it can block, dirt can get in there and it can block the tile.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Stuck. Ms. Ryan and Mr. Williams, I believe you have questions as well. Okay, we'll come to you after this.
Good morning, Ms. Ellis. I want to follow up on a company and I guess a commodity that you mentioned. You talked about green methanol, and in particular, you mentioned a company called CAP CO2. Can you just remind me why you thought that was an important thing to mention in this hearing?
In general, I feel that there are a lot of other methods of capturing CO2, and that those are just as important and yet they are not going to be affecting the landowners along this pipeline route. It's not going to affect our tile. It's not going to affect how we conduct our everyday business. These are companies that are coming up with other methods of utilizing CO2 and capturing it and using and making another byproduct rather than piping it to North Dakota and sticking it under the ground, which I cannot even see how that can be a smart move.
Do you think that technologies such as production of green methanol, for example, would help support the ethanol industry?
I do feel that way, yes.
If it turned out that Cap CO2 as a company were ready and willing to come into Iowa and build its facilities of any ethanol plant in the state, do you think that would be a good idea?
Yes, I do. And I feel that if they also could get the 45Q tax credit, it would be very beneficial to them.
Do you think it would be helpful for the Utilities Board to hear testimony from the CEO of Cap CO2 in this hearing?
Yes, I do. I think that would be a great. The more educated, the more knowledge you have, is more strength. Yes.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you, Ms. Ryan and Mr. Williams.
Good morning. Early on in your testimony, you made a statement that you did not feel that CO2 was a problem worthy of the proposal that's being addressed here. I just want you to assume for 1 second that, for the sake of the question I'm about to ask you, that CO2 is a problem worthy of some sort of a solution. Maybe not necessarily this one, but something. Does that assumption change anything about your testimony here today? I.e., do you still have the same concerns and reservations about the project, regardless?
About the project, the pipeline going through my field?
Yes.
I still don't want the pipeline in my field.
Okay. So all the problems that you've indicated through your list that you had just stated a few minutes ago, those are still problems that are still worthy of attention because they will affect your property in your mind. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. And just to kind of summarize, you wanted these things because necessarily you're trying to mitigate the risk of exposure of CO2 to your property and the properties around you. You're not looking to be stuck with the property over a number of years or permanently. You want to avoid compaction issues by restricting the time, manner, and means of construction. And you're also trying to limit the damage and ensure that you're compensated for any damage they cause. Is that an accurate summary?
It's a very long summary, but yes.
Okay. And this is not just a wish list. These are things that you came up with because they are absent from any easement proposal that you provided to date.
Yes, that is correct.
No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams and Mr. Zeman.
Good morning, ma'am. You had referenced wet conditions as one of those terms and conditions, and I believe you were reading them off a piece of paper. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Would you like the board to clearly define what wet conditions are so everybody knows when it's too wet for construction to occur?
That would be very helpful. My husband and I talked about wet conditions. I asked him, when they start rutting, when you're driving across your field, we don't plant when it's wet. We don't field cultivate when it's wet, because of compaction and different situations. So why do we want them to do construction during wet conditions? And I said, I believe, if I say it, I'm going to probably be wrong. Iowa Code 479B maybe talks about 12-inch ruts or something like that. They need to stop construction. I read it somewhere. I can't swear to where I read it at. 12 inches, that's pretty darn deep. I asked my husband, I said, what about 6 inches? And he says, well, that's still plenty. I asked him about saturation levels, if it's like, whatever percent, 30%, I'm not good with that. Would that be better? But then you have to go onto the ISU website and see, okay, we got so much rain here, how much, where are we at, what's the saturation level? And so we talked about 6 inches, but if somebody can come up with a good number and an easy method to calculate wet conditions, that would be fabulous.
And then that document that you were looking off from, is that something that you would like the board to consider if in fact they have to go through the eminent domain, that something like that would be attached to your property?
This was a exhibit C from someone else that because they have been filed already, recorded in the recorder's office. And so many of these was a combination of exhibit Cs from other landowners in Wright County.
Okay, but would you like to offer that to the board as an exhibit for them to consider? Similar to the map that you...
Yeah, it's got my chicken scratches on it, but yeah, we could.
Well, it's up to you. I'm just asking you.
I'm hoping we don't have to get to that point. Is what my concern is. I'm hoping we don't have to get to there. Sure, if that would help them with the decision on the permitting process and what is to be expected, I would be happy to hand this over.
It's up to you, but I just offered you that question the
Thank
same
you.
as Farm Bureau did. Thank you.
So I guess, Ms. Ellis, the question is, do you want our staff to grab that, make copies, and hand out to all the parties? And then do you want to offer that as, what would be your, we'd refer to it as Ellis Hearing Exhibit number 2.
I am going to say no because it does have somebody's signature on it, the person that I've used.
Okay, that's fine.
So I'm going to say no. Otherwise, I would have said yes, but I'd have to black out. So I'm going to say no.
And just so you know, what you did state in those different points was also part of the record.
Thank you.
So we do have your verbal reading of those different points have been recorded. So
Okay, thank you.
I believe, I guess the only other thing I had, I'm just curious. So on the parcel where you said it's on the very, very south end. Yeah. Oh, my bad. I did not see your name up on end. Mr. Doblinsky.
Thank you. I just have one quick clarifying question, Ms. Ellis. You said that list of things that you would want included were derived from easements that had been filed by other landowners or had been filed by Summit that had been entered with other landowners into the land records in Wright County. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so those are all terms that Summit has agreed to with somebody, and you've aggregated those, and you would want those in your easement.
Correct.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right, thank you. Just to clarify, on that parcel that you see in front of you in the very south, there looks to be like a little green section right there. What is that?
I'm going to say I am a terrible, terrible landowner. I've not been back there. I think that's grass, and it's for conservation practices for washing. It's very highly erodible land. It's not, and so there's some areas that you're going to have to put some grass to stop erosion. So I'm guessing that's there.
Potentially,
Grass.
could that be where tile comes out at all? I don't know for sure.
Not according to my maps.
Okay.
It's not.
And I haven't had a chance to look at
No,
that
that's
map
all right.
yet. But, okay.
Okay.
I believe, looking at my list of questions here, I believe that is all the questions I have, and I cannot forget about Board Member Marks. Any questions? None. All right.